Welcome to back to the Clear to Close podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us, my father, Doug Thomson, who started TechneTitle 37 years ago. I'm still serving as our president, so welcome and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Just to start everything off, can you just tell us about your background and how you got into this business 37 years ago?
Yeah, my background, I'm an attorney. And some of the background is when I moved back to Cincinnati, I was hired by a high-tech company. And at that time, they were involved in the beginning of the computer software business. And I was with them for 6 years, and they were positioning to go public. And they restructured at that time. And I realized I would not be part of the package where they offered a bunch of stock options to others. So I said, my plans for my life exceeded their plans for my life. So I sat down with my boss and I said, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to set up my own business. I'd like to transition out of the company. And he agreed to that. And he said, well, why don't you stay and hire someone in? And at that point, I did, trained them, and then I started just working, hung up my shingle. And I was mayor of the city of Milford at that time, so I had a lot of contacts. And I began the law practice, and to their credit, they still gave me work 6 months beyond my departure. I met with a friend, and he gave me some great advice. I said, well, what sort of business should I be thinking of? He said, well, what you ought to do is think of like real estate law or a title company. And the reason is it's clean law. You're doing something significant by helping someone buy or sell a house, which is the most significant investment they'll ever make. And also, it's clean. You're paid at closing, so you don't have a receivable problem, and you can take pride in the work. And so that gave me the idea of starting the title company at that time.
So you left, you started the law practice and then started the title company shortly
Well,
after.
and actually I patched together 3 different businesses. One is the law firm. I became assistant county prosecutor. I applied for an ad in the paper with a medical service company. I did that a day a week. And I was trying to launch the title company. So I had these 4 balls rolling. At the same time, my son was born, who is you. And a quick story on that. I remember leaving the payroll. When we made the decision, we were having trouble conceiving at the time. So I made the decision to leave, and then my wife became pregnant with soon-to-be Josh. But I left a very secure position. I was general counsel of this high-tech growing company, and I decided to leave. And I left payroll on January 1st, 1987, and Josh was born 6 days later. And I remember walking around the courthouse downtown saying, what have I just done? I left a secure job. Here I am with a young son, wife to support, and what am I going to do? And I'm a walking case of, I felt like malpractice because it's been a long time since I'd done a title exam or whatever. But
you mean the business didn't just show up overnight?
It didn't. No, it didn't. We'll get into that. But at that point, I dug in and I had these 3 balls rolling, and we're able to put things together and the groundwork for the company.
Awesome. So how did the name TechneTitle come about?
Well, we're in the Park 50 Techno Center. It's like things were technical. Back then, And so we're in the Park 50, so TechneTitle, it was a logical play on that.
Heck, we hadn't even thought of Y2K at the time.
Yeah, we didn't. Exactly.
1987.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I get questions now like, oh, TechneTitle, like, how do you guys come up with that? It's like, well, so it's 37 years ago, so it's not what you're thinking.
Exactly.
People either name something after the street that they live on, the street that they work on, or their last name.
Right. Yes.
So thinking back to the early days, are there any, I guess, memorable like successes or experiences that kind of like were a turning point in the business or stick out in your mind?
It's there was one that really played out, and At church at the time, there was a guy that owned a bank. And I said, well, I can talk to him, and he agreed to provide me business. And so I kind of based things around about getting business from this bank. And so I launched the business, and then we started to have meetings about doing business with them, and then it came back, well, you aren't large enough. So what I anticipated having to happen did not, and I'm thinking, what do I do now? And there was a realtor in town. Her name was Yvonne Height, and she was an entrepreneur, a woman-owned business. And she believed in me and started throwing me some business to do some cash deals. So that got us launched. But one of the things you realize in life is things don't always go according to plan, and you have to make adjustments. And that was a big adjustment, but the people that helped me came from a direction I did not anticipate. And that was a huge life lesson, I think, where you plan something, it doesn't, but then things still work out.
Yeah.
So
I think that's absolutely correct. I mean,
Yeah.
you can make all the plans you want in the world,
Yeah,
and it's good to have a plan. You can't go through life without a plan,
Right.
but just expect it to change, right?
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges? I know you talked about some of them, but can you think of like a real specific challenge that you guys had?
One is getting started.
Sure.
Because you're competing against established companies, and I was an unknown. And it took me really 3 years to get any accounts of significance. So I was patching together, 3 or 4 different jobs. And then when I did get a little bit of work, I banked that with a title company. And then after 3 years, I had enough revenue, a bank, to start hiring staff. So I began to hire at that point, and we hired like 5 people very quickly, and were able to grow because they were able to bring some accounts over with them. But the biggest thing, the hardest thing, is starting out and getting people to believe in you if you don't have established track record. So that was pretty.
Absolutely. I mean, you're sitting here, you're working with, you're helping your neighbors buy their houses, right? I mean, it's not some random person off thousands of miles away. You're sitting here in it with them.
Right.
Just once your reputation really takes off, I mean, Josh has heard a lot of people, since he's relatively new in the business, talking about you, right? And none of them say, I mean, obviously a lot of people say, Doug's very smart, all that, but they say Doug is a good person and he takes care of people, right? I mean, that's been my experience in the 10 years I've been here.
It's kind of the contrast, like the name's TechneTitle, which tech is like, oh, computers, like we do it all online. But that's really the opposite of how we do it. It's about the personal relationships because like you mentioned, it is the most significant transaction in people's lives.
Right.
And relationships matter.
Well, in terms of marketing, what we've done in the past is really not much. And we rely on just reputation, people having good closings to spread the word, or if a loan officer leaves, they go to another company and tell that company about us. But, things are changing technologically wise. The younger generation, they rely a lot more on internet reviews, things like that. So we're having to, migrate our direction to change with how the market's changing. But historically, we weren't doing anything, and I had maybe something on Facebook and 2 friends or something, but all that's had to change, much as we're here today. Because the direction the market's changing and how you have to reach people.
And while the tactics used might change, the goal never changes, right? It's to provide a good service at a quality price and to be the person people can rely on when they need something. So, and it really hasn't changed in the 10 years I've been here, and just talking with the staff, it really hasn't changed beyond that.
Right, and I think, Trey, to your point, the relationship component's very important now because things are so impersonal. I mean, whether you have to pump your own gas or do your own banking, I mean, the personal contact is getting lost in all this technology. And I still think the personal relationships are key. And especially now, it's like, who can you trust? It's a trust issue in the society because everything seems to be generating, and the level of trust is going down. So you need to preserve that, and the companies that preserve that, do what they say they're going to do, in the time they say they're going to do it, treat people fairly at a fair price, I think those are the ones that are going to succeed ultimately.
Yeah. In the long run.
In the long run, it may take some time.
Yeah. Talking about providing a good product of quality service, can you explain title and title insurance for those, just in your own words, for those that might not really understand what this is all about?
Well, what title insurance does is insure past acts. You know, unlike your auto insurance, if you're driving now on the highway, it's going to insure you against an accident in the future. Title insurance basically covers what's happened in the past. And if you look at historically, we have to go back 40 years under the Ohio Marketable Title Act, and there's a lot that can happen in the chain of title. There may be a missing mortgage that someone forgot to pay off and it's not released, or a missing heir that pops up from an estate, or an error in the deed. And the insurance covers all that, including the legal costs to defend those actions. And particularly now that the volume of transactions is increasing, historically, if you go back 40 years, people would own farmland. It would be passed generation to generation, and the title didn't change that much. Now it's changing every 5-7 years, and between foreclosures, divorces, bankruptcies, there are many things that can happen, and the title insurance insures against that.
We've talked a little bit about this, but just foundationally, like, what is title, and why is it so important to really to individuals, but as a society? And
I mean, that's huge. And if you look at what's made this country great, it's the security of title. Knowing that if you're going to make an investment, whether it's buying a home or building a building such as this or the Park 50 where we are, that someone's not going to take it from you. And that's huge as a society. Because if you look at across the world, I remember going to Nicaragua after the Civil War, and we stayed with this husband and wife who were doctors. And they were doctors, but right beyond their window was this barrio where people were showering with the garden hose. And I'm thinking, is title secure in that country right after the Civil War? Because people left, they fled, but then they came back and won their house back, and they may not have been able to get it. So, foundationally, our country protects personal property and real property, and that's why we can build things. You can build highways, you can build hospitals, schools, churches, everything, and you have secure title. And that would not have happened in a lot of countries. Yeah. So, and that's helped create what we are.
Yeah, like Trey mentioned, I'm newer to this business, so it's like understanding, what is title, life, liberty, property.
Right.
And I think it's something that we as Americans take for granted. Is like, of course I have the right to use my house and do whatever I want with it. There's HOAs and things like that, but for the most part, you have that right, and it's not something we think about. But in other episodes, we talk about some threats that we're currently facing to title and maintaining that. But it's something not that we often don't think about, but is extremely foundational to,
absolutely.
To us as a country.
Absolutely. And a kind of an aside, this is interesting, in some of the history of the U.S., is Abraham Lincoln's dad. When they lived in Kentucky, they owned 3 properties down there, and they lost all 3 in a land dispute. So he ended up moving to Indiana and then Illinois ultimately, but how American history has changed as a result of that.
I guess that's a rare case of where it was actually good that he didn't have
title
exactly.
insurance.
Yeah,
Right,
I say so. More title disputes means more Abraham Lincolns is what we're saying. So, okay.
No one gets
It's
title.
counterintuitive.
Fine, I guess. All right.
So reflecting on, I guess, where the industry was when you started, like, how has it changed and evolved, and to where we are today, and where do you see the industry going, looking into the future?
Yeah, where it was when we first started, you had the settlement statement, which we call the HUD, and that was hand typed on carbon paper. So you had 3 copies, the original and 2 beyond that, and if you made a mistake, you had to retype everything. And then ultimately there was one software product called Blackacre, I remember it, and it created the HUD. And that was just wonderful technology. It was so marvelous you could do that. And then technology developed where you can do a lot more forms and all that. And that's kind of created why packages are maybe 100 pages long now, because you can do the word processing and all that with that. Back then, you had your computers within your company, and it was hard to communicate between offices. Everyone had a kind of standalone computer. Now it's all on the cloud. So things are different where software can be updated very quickly. So that's the change. The technology's made things a lot more efficient, but it's created, I think, a more volume of paperwork as well.
It's easy to throw something in.
Yeah.
And add something.
The other thing that's happened, which to me revolutionary, is the scanning. I would look for a file. It'd take me half an hour a day where someone would call in and I'd have to be rooting around the office or in storage to find it. Now we can just look on, it's right there.
Yeah.
So,
what about the complexity of the industry? Has technology helped like the complexity, or are things more complex now than they were 37 years ago?
I think things are a lot more complex because you can customize things more. I think as a society, technology's added certainly a lot of complexity to everything. So there's a lot more to manage. It's a lot trickier now, I think, than it ever was. Your staff needs to, I think, to be more skilled, to be aware of kind of all the changes, whether it's conveyance fee changes or the county's changing this or that. It's just changing very rapidly, or government rules and regulations being hit with, one thing after the other, whether it's our escrow accounts. That wasn't ever done before, where we had to be audited on that, both our underwriters in the state of Ohio. So things are a lot more difficult to manage.
But you've always said it before, you do better in TechneTitle itself does
Right.
better in an uphill run.
Right.
And to that thing, the audits, for example. I mean, that's probably a good thing, right?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Because you have had numerous stories of people doing the wrong things with the money. I mean, you're being entrusted with millions of
Correct.
dollars,
Right.
Hopefully, if you
Yeah.
are doing a decent bit of business. And it would be so easy,
It is.
right, to do the wrong thing with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
a quick story. When I was president of the Ohio Land Title Association, actually before then I was asked to serve and review the defalcations, they're called, in Ohio. And some guy took money from the escrow account and was gambling on penny stocks.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
And of course he lost. And so his whole company shut down. But you are, to Trey's point, entrusted with millions and millions and millions of dollars of people's hard-earned money, and if you do that with integrity, and we're on top of our escrow account. I mean, we do a really good job there, but you are entrusted. It's a level of trust, and that's people's life savings that can go into their house. So it needs to be done right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know just if the check was dated wrong.
Right.
And I had to correct it
Yeah.
at the closing and initial it. I either have to report that back as soon as I get back to the
Right.
office, or our staff will come into there and say, what happened? We got to
Right.
report that this isn't right.
Yeah, exactly.
So looking back at the long history of the company, what things would you say you're most proud of? Either the company did or through your career in the title business.
I think one of the things, the personal relationships we've developed, particularly with our staff.
Yeah.
And the thing I'm proudest of is it's rare to have someone work their whole career for a company now. That's just never done. And in 1987, I hired my first employee, Joy Carver, and she's still with us 38 years later. And what we're having now is a lot of people retiring, which is kind of hard because you're losing a lot of knowledge there. But we have a lot of people that have stuck with us through the years and are now retiring from the company. And I think that says a lot for our staff and ability to work together and the relationships we've had in a business that's very tough. I mean, because our staff does get beat up a lot. They have, the agents, the buyer and seller, the lenders, all converging on them. So it's a stressful business for them. But despite that, they've hung in there and stayed with the company through these years. So that's the thing I'm proudest of, is the longevity of our staff.
Yeah.
They thrive under pressure too. I mean,
Yeah.
they probably don't always want the pressure, right?
Right,
But
right.
you got to think buyers, sellers, everyone's under contract deadlines.
Right.
Need to get this, that, or the other out, and they're always calling and send you an email, call you 5 minutes
Right.
later, say, have you had a chance to look at this? And it's like, well,
Yeah.
no, not yet, but we'll get it. We'll get it taken care of for you.
But I also look at the number of companies that aren't around when we started, and we're one of the few that are still there after 38 years. So that's in a market that's gone up and down, interest rates up, down, no inventory.
Yeah. What were interest rates when you started back in the late 80s? They were
They were
coming
pretty
down
high.
from the peaks,
Yeah, they were.
right?
They were, I think, 10 or 12%.
Okay. Because it peaked at like 18 or
Yeah,
so. but they
our
were
first
on
house
the
I
way
bought
down,
at 17% interest. So
How much you buy it for?
Yeah, what was the price?
it was below 50. It was a foreclosure. It's the only thing I could afford.
It was a sheriff's sale, right?
It was a sheriff's sale. Yeah, it was.
Was that the one that had wonderful structural issues?
Yeah, it had structural issues. It had, an IRS lien I didn't know about. It's just-
Oh, so you really learned the value
Yeah.
of title insurance.
Great. Well, anything else, that you want to share with people? Part of the reason we wanted to start this podcast was to, give a voice to the industry, to allow people to understand what we do as, a title company. These are questions I had when I first started here, being newer to the business. And I'm part of the reason I wanted to do this was to give a voice and, be able to explain the value of what we do. So I guess any final thoughts or things that you would wish people in the industry or home buyers that are listening to this?
Well, in general, despite everything that's going on in the country, the United States is still a great nation in which we have a lot of freedom. Freedom to purchase a home, to own assets, and that is huge. And we want to be the company that people look to be able to do that and to do it with integrity, very quickly for them, efficient, and handle their hard-earned money in a way that is satisfactory to everyone. And the home ownership, being able to do that now is very important. I talked to someone who's an attorney in England, and he said, I can't afford, this guy's probably a multimillionaire, and he can't really afford to buy anything there. And property is in a family name for generations that just doesn't
Change hands.
Change hands,
Yeah.
exactly. So, we still have a lot of freedoms here, and it's something we need to really appreciate.
Yeah. Speaking to England, there's wonderful history there, but a friend of mine is actually a conveyancer. That's
Okay. Right.
in England, and I was just talking to her about real estate transactions, and if it closes in under a month, it's a shock.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
a cash deal,
Right.
no lender involved.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shock to them. So we really do have a good system.
Yeah, we do.
Regardless of the things that come up, right? We do have a good system because if you can imagine what it's like in other worlds, it's not perfect here.
No.
But it is pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely, Trey.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today. I think, like I said, we're trying to give insight into the industry and provide value to people and hopefully give people a little peek behind the curtain of who we are and where we've come from. So,
Good. Thank you for having me.
Thanks,
yeah,
Doug.
Of course. Thanks for watching the Clear to Close podcast. Please remember to like, subscribe, and comment.
All information provided in this publication is for informational and educational purposes only,
and in no way is any of this content contained herein to be construed as financial, investment, or legal advice or instruction. TechneTitle Agency, Inc. and the guests appearing on this podcast do not guarantee the quality, accuracy, completeness, or timelines of the information in this publication. While efforts are made to verify the information provided, the information should not be assumed to be error-free. Some information in this publication may have been provided by third parties and has not necessarily been verified by TechneTitle Agency, Inc. TechneTitle Agency, Inc., its affiliates, and subsidiaries do not assume any liability for the information contained herein, be it direct, indirect, consequential, special, or exemplary, or other damages whatsoever, however caused, arising out of or in connection with the use of this publication or in reliance on the information, including any personal or pecuniary loss, whether the action is contract, tort, including negligence or other tortious action.